Elijah Carter never imagined his life could change in an instant. One moment he was walking to school, backpack slung over one shoulder, mind preoccupied with an upcoming debate competition and a history test. The next, he was face down on the pavement, cold metal cuffs biting into his wrists, surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. The officer's voice was sharp, unquestioning. "We got him." "Got who?" Elijah barely had time to protest before he was yanked to his feet. His heart pounded, confusion twisting into fear. "I didn't do anything," he tried to say, but the words didn't matter. His hoodie, his sneakers, his skin, that was all it took. The weight of a broken system pressed down on him the moment they shoved him into the squad car. Inside the station, the dehumanization continued, his fingerprints taken, his shoelaces removed, his identity reduced to a case number. Then came the worst blow, the so-called evidence, a grainy security video, a faceless figure, a vague description. That was all they had. Still, they offered a plea deal, a way out, but at the cost of admitting to a crime he didn't commit. They expected him to sign his life away, to become just another statistic. But Elijah wasn't going down without a fight. He wasn't a lawyer, he was just a kid. But when he stepped into that courtroom, he didn't just defend himself, he turned the entire case upside down. Because when the system fails you, when the world decides your fate before you even speak, sometimes the only option left is to fight back. And that's exactly what he did. Elijah's pulse pounded in his ears as the squad car sped through the streets, the flashing lights bouncing off the windows of passing buildings. The city moved on, indifferent to the boy in the back seat, wrists bound, heart hammering. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tell them they had the wrong person. But deep down, he already knew the truth. They didn't care if they had the wrong person. The station was colder than he expected. The air smelled like sweat and stale coffee, the kind of place that saw so many people come and go that their presence barely mattered. A processing officer barely glanced at him before snapping on a pair of latex gloves and yanking off his shoelaces, his belt. It was routine for them. For Elijah, it felt like being stripped of his identity, reduced to nothing more than a suspect. The interrogation room was worse. A single metal chair, a table scratched with the ghosts of past names, a flickering fluorescent light humming overhead. He sat there, hands curled into fists in his lap, staring at the door. Every second felt like an eternity. Then it swung open. His mother, Angela Carter, stormed in like a force of nature. Her eyes locked onto his, scanning him for injuries, for anything they might have done to him. She barely had time to breathe before a voice cut through the tension. "We have surveillance footage that places him near the crime scene," Officer Greg Turner stated, arms crossed. The badge on his chest seemed to shine under the harsh light, a symbol of authority Elijah no longer trusted. Angela turned to him, her voice sharp as a blade. "What footage? Show me." Turner didn't flinch. "Not necessary. He matches the description." Elijah's stomach dropped. He already knew what was coming. Dark hoodie, sneakers, young black male. That was all it took. Angela's nostrils flared, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "That's your description?" Turner shrugged. "That's what we have." Elijah watched as his mother took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. But he could see it, the anger, the frustration, the helplessness. And in that moment, Elijah understood something terrifying. The truth didn't matter. The system had already decided he was guilty. Elijah sat in the cold, gray holding cell, his back against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest. The concrete beneath him was hard and unforgiving, mirroring the feeling settling deep in his bones. His wrists still throbbed from the too tight cuffs, a dull reminder of how quickly his life had spiraled out of control. Hours had passed, but time felt meaningless here. Somewhere beyond the thick steel door, he could hear the muffled voices of officers moving about the station. Phones rang, papers shuffled, footsteps echoed against tiled floors. To them, this was just another night, just another kid in trouble. For Elijah, it was something else entirely. The door creaked open, and he snapped his head up as his mother, Angela, walked in, her face tight with barely contained fury. But before she could say a word, a new voice entered the room. A man in a wrinkled suit stepped inside, flipping through a thin case file like it was the least important thing he'd touched all day. Martin Hayes, the public defender. He barely looked at Elijah before speaking. "They're offering a deal," Hayes said, his voice flat, almost bored. "Plead guilty, and you'll avoid trial. You'll get probation, maybe some community service." Elijah felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. Guilty? For what? He stared at the man, trying to understand how this was happening. How was this justice? Angela didn't wait a second before snapping. Are you serious? You want my son to admit to a crime he didn't commit? Hayes exhaled slowly, as if he had dealt with this argument 100 times before. Mrs. Carter, I understand how you feel, but this isn't about what's right. This is about what's possible. It's his word against a police officer's. Do you really think a jury will take his side? Elijah's hands clenched into fists. They weren't even pretending this was fair. Angela's voice was like steel. We're not signing anything. The lawyer sighed. I don't think you understand how these cases go. If this goes to trial and he loses, the consequences could be far worse. Elijah swallowed, his throat dry. They were trying to scare him. They wanted him to believe there was no way out. But as he sat there, watching his mother refuse to back down, something inside him shifted. If no one else would fight for him, then he would fight for himself. Elijah lay awake in his bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The dim glow of the street lamp outside cast faint shadows across the room, but his mind was too restless to focus on anything but the events of the past 24 hours. The arrest, the cuffs, the way they looked at him not as a kid, not as a person, but as a suspect. His mother had fought for him in that station, but it hadn't been enough. They wanted him to plead guilty, to take the easy way out, admit to a crime he didn't commit, and move on. But how could he move on, knowing the system had already decided his fate before he even spoke? A deal wasn't justice. A deal was surrender, and Elijah Carter wasn't about to surrender. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through his window, he had already made up his mind. If they wanted him to give up, he would do the exact opposite. At school, he didn't sit with his friends at lunch. He didn't scroll through his phone or pretend everything was normal. Instead, he headed straight to the school library. The law section was small, just a few shelves filled with thick, outdated textbooks. But it didn't matter. He needed to understand the system that had tried to trap him. He grabbed a book on criminal procedure and flipped through its pages. He read about burden of proof, how it wasn't his job to prove he was innocent, but the prosecution's job to prove he was guilty. Hadn't they skipped that part? Next, he found a section on evidence. If it wasn't handled correctly, if there were inconsistencies, it could be thrown out. Did they even check the security footage properly? Did they check anything at all? Then something caught his eye: witness credibility. A police officer's testimony carried weight, but if their history showed patterns of misconduct, that could change everything. Elijah froze. Officer Turner, the same man who had arrested him without proof, how many others had he done this to? He needed to find out. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elijah felt something shift inside him. Fear was turning into something else, something sharper. He wasn't a lawyer, he was just a kid. But he wasn't going to let them decide his future. He was going to fight back. Elijah barely noticed the time slipping away as he pored over the thick legal textbook in front of him. Pages filled with dense text blurred together, but he forced himself to keep reading, memorizing everything he could about criminal procedure, evidence, and courtroom strategy. If the system was going to try to bury him under assumptions and weak accusations, then he would arm himself with the one thing they hadn't expected him to have knowledge. The quiet hum of the library was interrupted by a shadow falling over his table. Elijah glanced up to see Mr. Langley, the school librarian, peering down at the books stacked in front of him. The older man adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "That's some heavy reading," Langley said, pulling out the chair across from him. "Most kids don't spend their lunch break buried in criminal law." Elijah hesitated. He could lie, say it was for a school project, but something about Mr. Langley's knowing expression told him it wouldn't work. So instead, he sighed and closed the book. "I'm in trouble." For the next hour, Elijah laid everything out: the arrest, the so-called evidence, the plea deal, the way it felt like no one in that courtroom was actually interested in the truth. Mr. Langley listened without interrupting, nodding every so often, his expression unreadable. When Elijah finished, there was a long pause. Then the librarian leaned back in his chair. "You've got good instincts, kid. But court isn't just about what's true, it's about how well you can make people see the truth." Elijah frowned. "What do you mean?" Mr. Langley tapped the book in front of him. "The law is about more than just facts. It's about presentation. If you want people to believe you, you have to make them question everything they think they know." Elijah sat up straighter, flipping to a fresh page in his notebook. "Tell me everything." For the first time, he wasn't just hoping for justice, he was preparing for battle. Mr. Langley broke down the basics of courtroom strategy, explaining how to plant doubt in a jury's mind, how to ask the right questions, and how to force the prosecution to prove their case instead of just assuming guilt. By the time Elijah left the library, his notebook was full of ideas. He wasn't just learning the law anymore, he was learning how to win. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee, the kind of place where lives were decided in hushed voices and shuffled papers. Elijah sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped together, his heart pounding a steady rhythm in his chest. His public defender, Martin Hayes, sat beside him, flipping absent-mindedly through a thin case file. The same lawyer who had barely looked at him in the station, the same man who had pushed the plea deal, now seemed just as uninterested in fighting for him as he had before. Elijah wasn't expecting much from him. Across the room, Officer Greg Turner sat stiffly in his uniform, arms crossed, jaw set. His confidence was obvious. He didn't expect to lose. At the front of the room, Judge Benjamin Holloway entered, his presence commanding silence. The courtroom settled, tension thick in the air. Then it began. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blue suit, stood first. She spoke with certainty, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The defendant was seen near the crime scene wearing clothing that matches the suspect. Officer Turner, a veteran with over 15 years of experience, made the arrest based on probable cause. The case speaks for itself." Elijah clenched his fists under the table. Probable cause. Those two words had stolen days of his life. The prosecutor turned, pacing slowly before the jury. "This case isn't complicated. A store was broken into. Stolen goods were taken. And who was seen nearby? The defendant, the hoodie, the sneakers, the timing, it all adds up." She made it sound clean, obvious. Then Martin Hayes stood up. Elijah braced himself, hoping for something, anything. But his lawyer simply adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and muttered, "My client maintains his innocence. We intend to show that the evidence does not conclusively prove he committed this crime." That was it. Elijah closed his eyes for half a second, swallowing his frustration. This was exactly what he had expected. If he wanted to win this fight, he was going to have to do it himself. Then the judge turned to him. "Mr. Carter, I understand you wish to speak on your own behalf." Elijah took a deep breath. His mother sat behind him, hands clasped together, watching him like her entire world depended on what he said next. He stood, his pulse steady. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." This was his moment. Elijah Carter took a slow, measured breath as he stepped forward. His hands were steady, his voice clear. This was it, his one chance. The courtroom was still, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The prosecutor watched him with mild curiosity, while Officer Turner sat stiffly in his chair, his expression unreadable. The jury, a mix of strangers who would decide his fate, studied him with cautious interest. Now he had to make them see the truth. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I want to talk about the evidence, or rather the lack of it." A murmur rippled through the room. Elijah gestured toward the prosecution's table. "The security footage, where is it?" The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "We were just about to present it." The grainy video played on the screen, showing a hooded figure moving fast. The store window was already shattered. The suspect's face was completely hidden. Elijah let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "That's it?" The prosecutor frowned. "That is you." Elijah shook his head. "No, it's not." Another murmur. The tension in the room shifted slightly. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I ask a question?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." Elijah looked straight at Officer Turner. "Officer, how tall am I?" Turner blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know. 5'4"? Elijah pointed at the screen. "Then tell me why the store's security logs say the suspect is 5'9". A pause, a heavy pause. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Turner's jaw tightened. Elijah could feel the room begin to change. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Prosecutor, do you have an explanation for this discrepancy?" The woman pressed her lips together. "The footage quality is poor. It's difficult to make an exact measurement." Elijah shook his head. "Not according to the store's security system." He turned back to the jury, his voice steady. "Most modern cameras have a height scale at the entrance. It's designed to measure people during a robbery. The footage they're showing you, look closely. That height marker is right there." A few jurors leaned forward. Officer Turner shifted in his seat. The prosecutor tried to recover. "Even if the height isn't exact, the hoodie and sneakers match. That still places you at the scene. Elijah didn't flinch. He was ready for this. With all due respect, that's not how evidence works. He turned back to Officer Turner. Did you check my shoes when you arrested me? Turner's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. Of course. Elijah nodded. And were they the same shoes the suspect was wearing? Turner hesitated, just for a second. But everyone saw it. The prosecutor cleared her throat, trying to regain control, but Elijah was already ahead of her. You don't have to prove every detail, she started. Elijah cut in. Yes, you do. Another ripple of murmurs. He wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was unraveling their entire case. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, thick with tension. Elijah could feel it, the shift. He had cracked the case wide open, and now the prosecution was scrambling. This wasn't just about whether he was guilty or innocent anymore, this was about whether the system had ever even tried to find the truth. Elijah turned to the jury, his voice steady. The law says you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And right now, there's doubt all over this case. The prosecutor straightened her papers, trying to maintain composure. Officer Turner had reason to believe. Elijah didn't let her finish. Belief isn't evidence. More murmurs from the jury. The judge didn't interrupt. He was listening now. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He walked toward the judge's bench, holding it carefully. Your Honor, I'd like to submit something to the court. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. And what exactly is that? Elijah kept his expression calm. A record of Officer Turner's disciplinary reports. A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor's head snapped up, her composure cracking for the first time. Where did you obtain that? Elijah didn't blink. It's public record. The judge took the document and flipped through the pages. His expression darkened slightly as he read. Elijah turned back to the jury. Officer Turner is the man who arrested me. He's also the same man who has had multiple complaints filed against him for wrongful arrests. Turner's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched where they rested on the chair. He was losing control. The prosecutor cleared her throat, standing up. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Elijah shook his head. I think it's very relevant. He turned back to the jury. I think it matters that the officer accusing me of a crime has been caught doing this before. The judge exhaled sharply, setting the papers down. He turned to the prosecutor. Do you have any direct evidence linking the defendant to the crime? The prosecutor hesitated. For the first time, she had no response. Elijah took a slow breath, then looked directly at Turner. This case wasn't built on facts. It was built on assumptions. And assumptions ruin lives. The room was silent. Officer Turner sat there, staring at Elijah. He wasn't the one in control anymore. Elijah had turned the entire case against him. And for the first time, he knew he was going to win. The weight of the moment pressed down on the courtroom, thick and suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. Elijah had done it. He had dismantled their case piece by piece until nothing was left but doubt. Across the room, the prosecutor sat stiffly, her face unreadable, but the tension in her posture gave her away. She had lost control of the narrative. Officer Turner, once so confident, now looked cornered, his authority stripped away, his credibility shattered. Elijah's mother, Angela, sat behind him, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She was praying, hoping, waiting. Then the judge cleared his throat. We will take a brief recess before the jury deliberates. The gavel came down. The courtroom stirred, people whispering in hushed voices, the energy electric. Elijah sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His heart was still pounding, but this time, it wasn't from fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something else: hope. 20 minutes later, the jury filed back in, their expressions carefully neutral. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and the judge turned to the foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, an older man with silver hair and a serious expression, stood. He unfolded a slip of paper and cleared his throat. We have, Your Honor. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. His mother barely moved. The foreman looked directly at him. On the charge of burglary, we find the defendant, Elijah Carter, not guilty. A rush of relief flooded Elijah's chest. Behind him, his mother let out a sharp exhale, pressing her hands to her face. He barely had time to process the words before she wrapped him in a tight embrace, whispering, I'm so proud of you. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned to the prosecutor, his expression firm. After reviewing the evidence and the new information presented, I am instructing the District Attorney's Office to open an internal investigation into Officer Turner's conduct. A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. Turner's face turned red. "Your Honor, this is absurd," he sputtered, but the judge cut him off with a sharp look. "I'd be very careful about what you say next, officer," the judge warned, his voice cool, "because this court has seen enough today to question whether you should be wearing that badge at all." Silence. Turner clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching, but he wasn't the one in control anymore. Elijah Carter had walked into this courtroom as a defendant. Now he was walking out a free boy. As Elijah Carter stepped outside the courthouse, the world felt different. The sky seemed bigger, the air lighter. He had walked in as a defendant, but now he walked out free. Yet, freedom felt different when you had to fight for it. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded near the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward, a dozen voices shouted at once. "Elijah, how does it feel to prove your innocence?" He paused. His mother's hand rested on his shoulder, steadying him, her grip warm and reassuring. He could have said a lot. He could have said he felt relieved, that he felt angry, that he felt exhausted. Instead, he looked straight into the cameras and spoke the only truth that mattered. "I shouldn't have had to prove my innocence." Silence. Then murmurs. Reporters scribbling in notepads, recording his words. The weight of that statement settled, because that was the truth. He hadn't just fought against a wrongful accusation, he had fought against a system that was built to break people like him. And that system was still standing. Angela led him past the crowd toward their car, but just as he reached the sidewalk, a voice called out, "Hey, kid." Elijah turned. Mr. Langley, the school librarian, stood nearby, but he wasn't alone. A small group of students stood beside him, some familiar, some strangers. Kids Elijah had never really talked to before. But they were here. For him. Langley gave him a nod. "You did it. You made them listen." Elijah swallowed hard, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar, not just relief, but responsibility. He looked at the other students, the ones who had watched what happened to him, who had seen how easily the system could try to take someone down. How many others had gone through what he did? How many hadn't gotten the chance to fight back? He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "But what about the kids who don't get the chance?" Langley studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Then maybe it's your job to make sure they do." Those words settled deep inside Elijah. A week later, he walked back into the school library, a notebook under his arm. Langley looked up from his desk. "What's that?" Elijah set the notebook down. "A list." Langley raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" Elijah exhaled. "Every law I've been reading. Every right people need to know. Every trick they use to keep people quiet." He pushed the notebook forward. "I want to help people. Kids like me. So this never happens again." Langley smiled. "Then you'd better get to work." Elijah nodded, because he knew now justice doesn't come easy. But when you fight for it, you make it harder to ignore. And his fight was just beginning. Elijah Carter's story is more than just a courtroom victory. It's a powerful reminder that justice is not always given freely. Sometimes, it must be fought for. His journey teaches us that standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is a responsibility we all share. For those who have lived long enough to see the patterns of injustice repeat, Elijah's courage is a beacon of hope. His refusal to accept a false conviction reflects a universal truth. Silence allows wrongdoing to continue, but knowledge and persistence can break the cycle. This lesson applies beyond the courtroom. Whether in family, community, or society, we must question unfairness, empower the voiceless, and demand accountability. Elijah was just a boy, but his determination changed not only his own fate, but also the system around him. As we grow older, our wisdom and experiences become valuable tools for change. We have the power to mentor, guide, and inspire younger generations to fight for truth. Because justice should never depend on luck, it should be a right for all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.